Another Alien movie means more gnarly deaths, crazy transformation sequences, and new Xenomorphs. Be careful who you start liking in the movie because they might just be the next target of the Xenomorph, or a facehugger might plant eggs inside them. Over the years, the franchise has maintained to give us stories combining stupidity and bravery. Almost every project features the creature going around and killing nearly everyone. At the same time, the last one standing manages to kill them, sometimes all alone, sometimes with the help of a synthetic one. Let's look at everyone who has survived after facing the Xenomorph in the Alien franchise, and what happened to them after their survival. A little bit of warning though, don't get too excited about their survival. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Alien 1979. Ridley Scott saw Star Wars on the opening night and realized he had to do a sci-fi project, and thus he ended up making the 1979 masterpiece that would become a franchise over the years. Every single detail about the movie proves that it is a lot more than a creature feature, something that became a concept almost every other film was trying to explore back then. Featuring Sigourney Weaver, Tom Skerritt, Harry Dean Stanton, Ian Holm, Yaphet Kotto, and in one of the most iconic star cast ever. The story followed a commercial star freighter USCSS Nostromo that was towing a refinery platform containing 20 million tons of mineral ore. During their journey, they receive a transmission from the nearby moon, and while the entire crew is in stasis, this transmission provokes the ship's AI to wake them up. Like the 2001 Space Odyssey concept, the AI was more interested in the dangerous aspects of the missions than the humans themselves. That's something that influenced Ridley Scott, and that makes much more sense. It only adds an interesting angle to the movie already. To investigate this transmission, the Nostromo detaches from its cargo and lands on the moon, only to discover something that will end up spawning one of the most horrifying creatures in the history of cinema. 3 crew members, Dallas, Kane, and Lambert, explore the moon, only to find an alien spacecraft with the remains of a giant alien creature. Eventually, they end up in a room containing several eggs. The worst possible thing that this investigating crew could have done ends up happening as Kane tries to check the egg, only to be attacked by a creature that wraps itself onto his face. While the crew manages to bring him back to the base and ensure he's alright, they don't know what they have done. As they are having dinner, Kane starts to feel uncomfortable, and we witness a creature pop out of his chest, the very creature that would become the prime antagonist for the franchise. It starts growing more extensive and hiding inside the ship while the crew looks for it. One by one, the alien, called a Xenomorph, kills the crew. All this could have been avoided if they had listened to Ripley's quarantine protocols for the ship. With an alien creature running amok inside the ship, the surviving crew members find that all this was supposed to be part of the plan, as one of their crewmates, Ash, was a synthetic person, and the task for the crew was to get hold of the alien. The creature was supposed to be brought to Earth, even if it meant putting the life of the entire crew of Nostromo in danger. Ripley. Now, we come across the only survivor in this film, as the Xenomorph managed to kill everyone in the crew. Sigourney Weaver's Ripley would become one of the most iconic characters in cinema history, as she proved to put up against the monstrous creature, not only once, but multiple times in the franchise. Anyway, let's return to the first time Ripley faced the Xenomorph and how she survived the ordeal. So, Ripley decides the only solution to all this would be to arm the self-destructive system of Nostromo and get away with the shuttle. But even that proves to be difficult, as the alien stands on her path to the shuttle. But when Ripley goes to shut down the self-destruct system, she realizes she's too late and makes a final attempt for her shuttle, only to see that the Xenomorph isn't there anymore. As she escapes the shuttle, the Nostromo explodes behind her, and she prepares to put herself into stasis, only to discover that her battle isn't over yet, as the Xenomorph had managed to sneak into the shuttle with her. Now, fed up, Ripley puts on a pressure suit and finishes finishes the creature by planning to blow it out using the explosive decompression, only to see that it tried to grip itself to the doorway. Ripley doesn't hold back and uses the grappling gun on it to propel the creature. It hits the alien and throws it off, but the gun lashes out of her hand and catches in the closing door of the shuttle, allowing the alien to attempt to climb back into the ship. So as it slowly starts heading into one of the ship's engines, Ripley decides to turn this engine on, thus incinerating and blasting the creature into space. With the alien finally gone, Ripley decides to put herself and the crew's cat, Jones, into stasis as they head back to Earth. Also, she puts out a distress signal before heading to stasis, which is why we would get a sequel for the movie. We have the first survivor and one of the most popular characters from the franchise, but I don't think it's all as simple as that. We have yet to meet the gods and beings dedicated to ending humanity once and for all.
Go! Move!
Aliens, 1986. In a franchise sequel that would set up a whole new record in terms of sequels and franchises, Aliens would mark an essential point as it would be one of the best sequels ever made that almost topples the original film, even though fans have a difficult time choosing the best, between the two. After giving us the sci-fi masterpiece Terminator, which would spawn another franchise, director James Cameron decided to helm the sequel to the 1979 film, and it is the second best thing that has happened to the franchise ever since it began. It wasn't easy bringing back the iconic character of Ripley with Sigourney Weaver and valuing Ridley Scott's work, but then who else but Cameron could deliver this beat? The story continues right where we left it, where Ellen Ripley is rescued from her shuttle and sent to recuperate at Gateway Station. While it might not have been that long for us to see her again, Ripley finds that she has been adrift in space for the past 57 years, and that's not the only realization she has to fit in with, considering she finds out that her daughter has died, something that was kept from the theatrical release and only kept in the special edition release. Cameron felt like that would be an essential part of developing her arc. He wasn't satisfied with Ripley having lost her entire crew and been in stasis for the past 57 years. Anyway, the other people don't treat the circumstances that Ripley had been through very lightly, as they put up multiple charges against her over the destruction of Nostromo and, no evidence of the description Ripley had mentioned regarding the Xenomorph. As Ripley tries to prove what happened to her crew and justify her action, they inform her that LV-426, the planetoid that triggered the events with the encounter with the alien eggs, has become home to a terraforming colony. The humans couldn't stop proving their stupidity apart from touching a random alien egg. The actual scenario comes into play when the human stupidity endangers the people's lives at the terraforming colony. Carter Burke, played by Paul Reiser, reaches out to Ripley regarding the communication loss with the colony on LV-426. They informed her that they intended to deploy a unit of Marines to investigate, and she was to accompany them as a consultant. Sticking to the classic action tropes, she refuses at first, but then agrees under the condition that anything they come across will be destroyed and not kept for any other purposes. We come across a new crew of Marines, consisting of actors Bill Paxton and Lance Henriksen, the only two actors to have been killed by an alien, a predator, and a Terminator. Yeah, that's a crazy combination, but things about this combination will surprise you a lot more when you realize that these three franchises are also connected. Anyway, let's get back to the plot here, as the team of Marines and the cunning Burke and Ripley fall prey to multiple Xenomorphs. But by the end, only 3 people survive the ordeal. The survivors: Ripley, Newt, Hicks, and Bishop. This time, Ripley managed to have some people with her to save them from being killed by the Xenomorph. The first, and surprisingly, one of them is Newt, probably the only survivor of the colony after the facehuggers and the Xenomorph managed to kill everyone and build a hive. Newt was a traumatized young girl whose parents became the first victims of the facehuggers, and it was Ripley's dedication that ensured that she survived till the end. This commitment to saving the little girl could have been related to the fact that Ripley had not been around her daughter when she was adrift in space herself, something we find in the special edition cut of the film. So, along with Newt, Hicks, and Bishop, Ripley managed to get through and get on one of the dropships of the Sulaco. But just like her last encounter with the Xenomorphs, the Queen Xenomorph revealed herself to have stowed away in the dropship's landing gear. It managed to rip Bishop in two and started going towards Newt, hiding behind the floor of the Sulaco's hangar bay. Finally, when the Queen managed to corner her, Ripley showed up in the power loader, something she was pretty good at using, as demonstrated earlier in the film, as if it was the Chekhov's gun of the story. Ripley managed to eject the alien to outer space and managed to put the rest of the survivors, including a damaged Bishop, a wounded Hicks, and Newt, to hypersleep as they headed back home. We don't meet all these characters again, but their stories pop up in the franchise's third installment as we encounter another adventure. Only Ripley manages to make it through though.
Oh, God.
What happened to Newt after the movie? Even though she had managed to survive the events in the Sulaco and was put into hypersleep, her hypersleep ended up getting breached by the acidic blood from one of the facehuggers that had managed to sneak inside the Sulaco. So, the blood of this creature burned through the floor panels and damaged the wirings underneath, ultimately destroying the wiring and setting off an electric fire. The computer malfunctioned, and it ejected all 4 occupied cryotubes. They were launched into an ocean where they cracked, and it ended up flooding Newt's chamber, drowning her in her sleep. When Ripley discovered it, she suspected that Newt might have been carrying one of the chest bursters and asked the colony's doctor to check her. As the doctor checked her, he found nothing unnatural in her body, and she was given a proper cremation. What happened to Hicks after the movie? So, unlike last time, Ripley had some help from Dwayne Hicks, one of the Marines who did take the matter seriously and put up a good fight against the Xenomorphs. But Hicks would be severely injured when the blood from the alien would spill all over his face and chest and, melt through his chest armor. Ripley managed to save him and bring him along with the others and get rid of the Queen Xenomorph. But similar to Newt, Hicks would also die when his cryo chamber would also end up malfunctioning, and he would be cremated next to Newt. What happened to Bishop after the movie? So, Bishop's development with Ripley's character was interesting. The latter wasn't happy about his presence amongst the crew since he was synthetic. Now, the Queen ripped him apart in the end, but Ripley still put him into cryosleep for their journey back home. Again, the android would face further damage, be deemed irreparable, and be dumped into the scrap heap. Ripley managed to reactivate him to get the black box recorder, based on which she would find that a Xenomorph managed to stay aboard the Sulaco and had been roaming free on their planet. Also, he managed to convey that this information had already been transmitted to Weyland-Yutani. Bishop requested that Ripley disconnect it, considering he would never be the state-of-the-art android he once was. But, even though Bishop was gone, Lance Henriksen would return to the franchise in some crazy twists. Alien Free, 1992. A series of films in a franchise directed by 2 of the greatest directors of all time? That doesn't happen quite often. And then, there was the third film, Alien Free, directed by David Fincher. The movie is considered the worst when it comes to David Fincher movies. Still, regarding the Alien franchise, it might be a somewhat underrated entry that didn't receive the best reviews, unlike the previous films. It's a hard act to follow in the footsteps of Ridley Scott and James Cameron, and along with that, was the studio demanded something utterly distant from Fincher's vision. We get to see Lance Henriksen arrive as Bishop Weyland, the human who had designed Bishop's synthetic body himself. Now, the story focuses on the concept that the Sulaco had crash-landed onto a prison planet filled with men, Fiorina 161. Meanwhile, the facehugger that was loose had managed to plant the egg inside a dog, resulting in an updated 4-legged Xenomorph that's almost like a velociraptor. The Xenomorph managed to hunt down the prisoners one by one, while Ripley tried to plan a ruse to kill this monster, again. But in the process, she finds out that she's carrying one of Queen Xenomorph's embryos, which is why this Xenomorph is not attacking her. At the same time, she becomes the prime target of the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, which wants to take the embryo from her and doesn't really care about her at all. So Ripley has to kill the Xenomorph while making sure that she doesn't fall into the corporation's hands so that they can experiment on this creature for their evil purposes, putting a larger population under threat. The prison inmates and Ripley work together to lure the Xenomorphs to the foundry where they can kill it. After they successfully destroy the creature, after it manages to kill many prisoners, Ripley discovers that the corporation has arrived to help her get rid of the embryo. But not wanting to take chances with the creature, she sacrifices herself for the greater good and dives into the vat of molten metal right when the Queen Xenomorph is about to burst out of her chest. It's a rather tragic end, as we see the franchise's favorite character sacrificing herself to prevent the stupidity of the humans from being another reason for absolute chaos in the universe. But she's not the only one who bites the dust, as almost all of the prison inmates fall prey to the Xenomorph, except Morse, the wisecracking inmate who somehow manages to prevent getting in the way of the Xenomorph. In the end, there's no clarity regarding his fate, as he is last seen being taken away by Wayland Yutani, who might question him, considering he's the only inmate to have ever survived the mayhem that struck Fiorina 161. Alien Resurrection, 1997. In what might be one of the worst entries in the franchise, Alien Resurrection tries to make up for it with some of the most desperate moves ever. The first of these mistakes is that they try to return Ripley, and even though Sigourney Weaver does her absolute best to comply with the script, the story is entirely ruined by the mess it makes. Now, remember when Ripley dived to her death in the previous entry to the franchise while carrying the Queen Xenomorph embryo? Well, 200 years later, Ripley is cloned from a blood sample so that the Xenomorph she was carrying could also be returned. While the human errors were stupid in the first few films, they turned into the film's entire plot when they decide to bring back the creature that threatened humanity. The story takes place inside the USM Auriga spaceship, where a scientist managed to clone her. Ripley 8, a weird clone, has some special ability since the Xenomorph DNA got mixed into her. These abilities include super strength, acidic blood, and an increased seriousness on her part, making her a bit creepy at times. Now, the additional cast comes from a group of space pirates, similar to the Guardians of the Galaxy people, considering they provide human hosts for the Xenomorph experiments. But there's an impressive cast here, considering Ron Perlman and Winona Ryder made their franchise debut with this movie. Ryder appears as the first and probably only female synthetic character in the franchise, even though it's unclear if there are more of her than we might know. Although the movie is terrible overall, they didn't hold back from the creative aspect, as we see an exciting rendition of the Xenomorph with the newborn. The newborn is a ghastly looking creature born from the Xenomorph queen that has managed to absorb some of Ripley's traits and considers Ripley as its mother. Regarding emotional development, we see some of the most disgusting sequences in the franchise when they embrace each other. Eventually, the offspring has to be killed in what has to be one of the gnarliest deaths the movie has to offer us. Even though the newborn could be rather ruthless in its hunt to kill the humans, we see some pirates survive, with Ron Perlman's Johnner and Winona Ryder's android Call making it to the end. Even the French pilot of the Auriga manages to survive in the end. Well, that's a lot of survivors for a crazy movie featuring a weird rendition of Ripley and the alien creature. What happened to them after the movie? This ragtag crew would return in the follow-up novel Aliens Original Sin, where we would see the characters get together with new members of their Betty crew and take on some exciting change of views. Even though the movie made it appear as if they didn't want to do anything good, it seems that Call's directive involves preventing the spread of the Xenomorph. Now that Ripley was also dedicated to that, their next mission is to investigate the botanical colony of Domes Epsilon, where a Xenomorph outbreak has just happened because of a facehugger attacking one of the crew people. But their prime enemy is Loki, not Thor's brother, but a lot more complicated than that. A secret government organization had been working with the engineers for quite a while, and had a deal with each other. In exchange for technological advances, they would arrange for encephalopod outbreaks in remote planets so that the engineers could harvest the resultant Xenomorphs. After the Betty pirates attempt to save some of the Domes Epsilon occupants, they give up and decide to destroy the ship remotely with explosives. They manage to save one of the scientists, Angie, who joins their team. So now we have a group of pirates going around space, preventing secret dealings that ended up being quite an exciting plot, inspired by the worst film in the franchise. What happened to Annalee Call after the Alien Resurrection movie? Now, Annalee Call and Ripley have developed an exciting bond, and the result of this bond could be witnessed in the 4-issue storyline for Aliens vs. Predator vs. Terminator. Here, we see Call reaching out to Ripley to stop a super soldier who might prove to be a threat to humanity, and Ripley rejects the proposal, only to be convinced by Call in the end. Based on the comic book title, you might have guessed that this is no ordinary revolutionary storyline. And the super soldier is a Terminator that has acquired some of the chest bursters. Skynet might have some plans for them. But as Ripley and the rest of the crew of the Betty go on the mission, they are beaten by the Predator, who arrives right then to fight against the super soldier. But the super soldier manages to escape, and we see the Predator taking hold of Ripley instead. And they use her DNA to find more about the Xenomorphs and their history. They laud her bravery and ask her to join them in the battle. She's given the ceremonial things associated with a warrior as they head towards fighting off the Terminators. They put up quite a fantastic fight until the end, where we see how the tables have turned since Ripley manages to sneak into the ship of the escaping Terminator. Here, she uses her acidic blood to burn the fuel tanks to kill the Terminator and any Xenomorph prototypes it had kept inside the ship. In the end, we see Call eulogizing Ripley's death, which marks the end of Ripley's clone in the franchise. Now, we have to wait for another experimental director who will manage to bring her back to life somehow. Prometheus, 2012. After years of discussion and cancelled attempts, Ridley Scott finally returned to the franchise he created, with a plot he and Cameron had been discussing for quite a while. They intended to explore the story of the engineers, or the people who gave us our lives, and one of whom we had witnessed in the first Alien film, whose ship the crew invades. Now, Scott had planted the seed for the plot right there, and had plans to work on that story ever since. Meanwhile, Cameron had planned to work on that concept for the sequel, but then had to switch to a different story for the 1986 sequel, Aliens. But finally, in 2012, we had the story that had been in development for over a decade, and does it live up to the anticipation? Well, yeah, somehow. We finally get to see something other than the Xenomorphs that pose a significant threat to humanity, and the idea of humans and their hubris would be explored, consisting of a massive cast of actors ranging from Charlize Theron to Idris Elba. The story focuses on a team of scientists who have discovered a star map that leads them to a distant moon. Now, earlier in the movie, we get to see an exciting scene about some black liquid, which, by the way, means only death in this franchise, being consumed by one of the engineers and their body being destroyed in a way that led them to the human race. Like every one of the past entries to the franchise, we get an interesting synthetic human being with David, brilliantly played by Michael Fassbender, as it has its curiosity regarding the engineer's plans and hints at what he will end up being in the sequel. Apart from the crazy visuals that play an essential role in this franchise, there are moments when you question the human stupidity as they start touching things and the decisions that lead to their deaths very clearly. Like someone running straight as a massive ship is crashing straight and not even thinking of running sideways to save themselves quicker. Charlize Theron's character deserved a better death than that. It becomes apparent very early in the movie that not all the characters will survive because a wide variety of things are at play that are beyond them. But even then, someone makes it through, and along with herself, she ensures to save David. Elizabeth Shaw lost her husband to the black liquid when he turned into a zombie-like creature, and ever since then, she has been heavily focused on that mission. After she gets infected by one of the squid-like alien babies, she manages to undergo surgery and get it out of her body before it pops out and kills her instead. But saving David turns out to be a mistake, considering he had other intentions entirely, and part of these plans did include turning Shaw into his test subject.
Impossible to say.
What if they know better than us?
So long as they are no worse.
What happened to them after the movie? In a short film released in the marketing following up Alien Covenant titled The Crossing, we got a hint of what happened to Shaw and David after they managed to escape LV-223 in the engineered Juggernaut ship. Shaw manages to repair David to help her pilot the ship, and the two go look for the engineer homeworld. While Shaw gets into one of the engineer hypersleep capsules, David promises to wake her when they arrive at the planet. David researches on the engineer as he learns about their society and customs. When he finally arrives at the uncharted planet, we see him recite Ozymandias as hundreds of the vials of the steatite, black liquidy thing, are released onto the engineer standing beneath the ship. As for Shaw, the last we see her is in one of the deleted sequences where David experiments on her to make the Xenomorphs more humanoid. There is some concept art of her corpse amongst the various experimental items David had worked on the island of Dr. Moreau that he had created for himself. Alien Covenant 2017. Ridley Scott knew he had to build on his developed plot, so he continued with a prequel series. Alien Covenant follows in the footsteps of Prometheus and gives us a terrible look at what happened to the characters of the previous entry, while providing some exciting and scary updates to the Xenomorphs. However, one thing the director had started doing that became apparent very early was getting a huge star cast and making us wonder who would make it to the end. And it worked. Fans were excited to see what would happen to some of the stars, and we witnessed the death of one of the central characters, played by James Franco, even before he could say something, as he was burnt to a crisp inside his cryo boot. Michael Fassbender appears as the synthetic human being Walter, who gives us the creeps. Still, Fassbender reprises David, who appears as the villain, having fun creating his new and updated experimental xenomorphs. As the crew of the Covenant is on a colonization mission, they come across a transmission that brings them to a planet where the ship from Prometheus seems to have crashed. Here, David is the only survivor, but the scariest thing we see here is that this planet doesn't even need face huggers, as the fertilizing virus could enter through the holes like nostrils and ears, and then make you give birth to the xenomorphs. One of the most haunting scenes in the movie is when we discover that David has turned entirely into a god when he releases the various pods of the black liquid into the planet's population of engineers, who, die instantly. It sets up the idea of AI being the primary villain and adheres to a whole new level in the way that Scott wanted to establish the parallel to the events that transpired in one of his favorite films, 2001: Space Odyssey. One by one, we witness the crew members being killed until Daniels manages to figure out what is happening with the surviving crew members, only to come to terms with having fallen into David's trap. David and Walter go against each other, and the fight seems rather scary until you realize that one of them holds the fate of what will happen next. It appears that Walter has managed to make it through as he gets on board the ship along with the other survivor, Tennessee, played by Danny McBride. Tennessee and Daniels. One of the most repetitive aspects of these movies is that if you have lost your loved one, you might make it to the film's end by staying strong. Both Tennessee and Daniels lost their loved ones and still managed to remain committed to their roles, and that's what helped them stay alive somehow. But what happens after they manage to survive the end is the creepy part, because as they go to their cryo sleep chambers, Walter reveals that he is David in disguise, and before Daniels can do anything, she is put to sleep. Considering what David did to Shaw and the number of humans he had to experiment with this time, we can be sure that there's something nefarious in his mind, and this time, he won't leave anything to chance.
We'll face it together.
Let's go.
Alien Romulus 2024. The latest in the series of Alien films is set right between the events of Alien 1979 and Aliens 1986. Helmed by Fede Alvarez, the movie brings on various tropes that we have seen in the Alien films while keeping in touch with the fresh new events that Ridley Scott managed to bring up in his latest additions to the franchise, serving us with another group of excellent actors who will all be going through what might be one of the craziest experiences with the Xenomorphs that, will be a memorable addition in comparison to all the other sequels that have been helmed by different directors, except Cameron, of course. This story is set in the mining colony where people work under the Weyland-Yutani Corporation and don't plan to free the colony's people anytime soon. Their intentions become apparent at the very beginning when we see one of the characters getting her work contract doubled when she intended to check in the completion of her hours. Kaylee Spaney's Rain Carradine is the protagonist, and her adoptive brother, Andy, sticks beside her. Andy is a synthetic human, and the relationship ends up being something that we might have wanted to witness with the character of Ripley. Ripley only managed to have some trust in Bishop, while the other androids led to terrible circumstances. So this is the ideal look into such a relationship, and is actually a beautiful depiction. Around the middle of the movie, Andy's programming gets altered, and his objective changes from protecting Rain to something that puts him under Weyland-Yutani's control. Luckily, Rain manages to change this to perfectly set up the ending where we see him come to her rescue. Filled with authentic renditions of the chest-bursting sequences, and a fresh new terrifying Xenomorph who will be a memorable cast member, Romulus stays up to the mark with Scott's original horror angle. The familiar appearance by Ian Holmes as Rook gives us some exposition regarding the people who had previously occupied the spacecraft that this group of younger crew wanted to use to, escape the mining colony. The final sequences reference Ripley and her adventures with the Xenomorphs as Rain faces off against the latest development in the Xenomorph family in the form of a creature that blends both human and Xenomorph and continues to grow larger. Even though it feels like Kay, one of the other crew members, will make it through to the end, she makes the biggest mistake by taking the black liquid. Remember, the black liquid is nothing but guaranteed death, and in Kay's case, it turns her fetus into the Xenomorph human hybrid that kills Kay and destroys Andy. As Rain finally attempts to control things, she puts on the pressure suit, fights off the hybrid creature, and finally manages to kick it out of the ship. So, the only people who end up surviving are Andy and Rain, even though Andy is severely damaged. As if she had seen the original Alien films herself, Rain puts on a final log before putting herself and Andy into stasis. The movie perfectly sets up the expectations for what happened to the duo, and we want to see them again. We just hope it won't take a 57-year gap like last time, though. Alien vs. Predator, 2004. If you thought the comic book storyline of Call and Ripley would be the only hint of crossover stuff you would get to see, then you haven't heard of the 2004 film, Alien vs. Predator. This movie pits the aliens against the predators as we encounter an interesting set of characters who might affect the chain of events so far in the franchise. Set in 2004, we see a group of scientists discover a pyramid buried deep inside Antarctica, only to find that it has a mix of multiple ancient civilizations. Lance Henriksen returns to the franchise as Charles Bishop Weyland, which means he got the android designed based on his appearance. Right after Sigourney Weaver, Lance Henriksen has to be the second most exciting part of the franchise. He is funding the expedition to explore something with significant historical value. However, they are not alone in this investigation, as it turns out that the Predators used to hunt the Xenomorphs as their prey for some initiation rituals. Yeah, it does mess up the timeline, but then we're not touching the other Predator movies, particularly Predator, which is probably one of the main reasons this movie got made. The last surviving Predator, Scar, is already there to hunt the Xenomorphs. He also manages to identify one of the only humans in the expedition group with any skills at all, Alex Woods, played by Sanaa Lathan. At the same time, most of the crew gets killed, and Weyland dies in a fashion that feels like they want to complete his record of getting killed across 3 different franchises. So, in the end, it's Alex and Scar against the Queen Xenomorph, which could have had some gruesome results, but surprisingly, Scar succumbs to his injuries and Alex's wit kills the Queen. In the end, we see the Elder Predator arrive on a ship, and they manage to take away Scar's body. But the franchise has to do something to get more money, and they do the craziest possible thing as they show that Scar's chest explodes and a Predalien pops out, paving the way for the sequel. Alex did fight quite the battle and managed to pull it off. She was even honored by the Elder Predator with a spear. It would be interesting to see her make a comeback, but let's hope that the franchise will be handled better by then. Or it's just gonna be like the graphic novel storylines we explored in Ripley 8 and Call. Aliens vs. Predator, Requiem, 2007. Aliens vs. Predator Requiem follows right where the previous movie left, with a Predalien targeting the humans in the peaceful town of Gunnison. The Predators also send their best player into the game, with Wolf, a veteran Predator who focuses on defeating the Predalien while containing the outbreak, and it does turn out to be quite the battle. Meanwhile, the humans here, Dallas Howard and Kelly O'Brien, hardly get to do much. Similar to the MonsterVerse films, where the humans are seen playing around while the monsters have fun battling each other. In the end, the two creatures battle to the top of the hospital roof, where they manage to wound each other sufficiently. But the town is in absolute chaos. And finally, the US military joins the match and decides to nuke the entire village, leaving nothing but a smoke crater. As if to appear cool, the movie ends with someone handing over the weapons that Wolf was using against the Predalien to Miss Yutani, hinting at the tie-up between Wayland and Yutani, a significant plot point in the Aliens franchise. Dallas and Kelly managed to survive along with their family, which is actually the only plot for them. Meanwhile, a miscreant manages to survive in the end, as a Predalien facehugger can be seen amongst the wreckage of the nuclear blast. Is it a warning that more Predalien movies are coming? Well, we don't know yet. Marvelous verdict. The Alien films have an interesting concept of killing characters, and so far, you might have observed some interesting patterns in the stories of the characters who managed to survive. Each film gets you emotionally attached to the protagonist by establishing how they perceive their loss. But for some people, the movies are all about the creative ways in which the people get killed. And there indeed is a funny and crazy and gruesome bunch of them in the franchise. Noah Hawley is quite excellent at finding creative ways to kill people in his shows. Let's see what he brings to the new FX series based on the Aliens franchise. And that marks the end of the video. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel. If you haven't already, have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone!